Welcome to Fall, Rise, Give, a space where we invite you to dig into the real cause of your suffering, looking at opportunities for growth with a change in your beliefs, thoughts, and actions so you can be your true self and be inspired. Join us as we explore life's ups and downs and navigate the twists and turns, sharing stories of resilience, hope, and the transformative power of giving back. Whether you're looking for a change, in recovery, or simply seeking inspiration, this podcast is your go-to for candid conversations, raw emotions, and a whole lot of heart. Tune in and discover how to fall, rise, and give back on life's extraordinary journey. Welcome to another edition of Fall, Rise, Give, turning struggles into opportunities by being your true self and help others. How you doing? I'm bartender Bob. Kumar is working at his other job right now, so he's unable to make it with us this week. However, we do have a guest that we had on a while back that I really enjoyed talking with, and the more I got to know him, the more I got to like him. And the last time that we had him on, we talked about some of the things that he was doing other than his Facebook and YouTube and stuff and his creations. We talked about his music creation. And I had the opportunity, after we talked the last time, to go listen to him. Benjamin Lerner, thank you so much for joining us again. The music that you're creating, man, is awesome. I really liked it. To me, it was very Eminem-esque, if that makes sense.
I'll take it. I love shady stuff. That's an ultimate compliment.
So how did you get your motivation to do music and to do the creation that you do?
Well, I've been writing poetry since I was 8. The first poem I ever wrote was on a shoe store receipt. And my parents read me a lot of poetry when I was growing up, and they read me a lot of books. And my parents are both journalists, and my mom's also a musician. So words and music have always been my two passions, long before they became a professional career in any aspect. And, we talked a lot about my recovery on the last show. Just a quick brief, if anybody's catching this, the 10-second spark notes. I was an IV fentanyl addict. I was an IV crack addict. I nearly lost my life, and recovery saved it. But during my active addiction, I made music glorifying addiction for a long time. And I don't hate myself for it. I don't hate street rap. I don't hate addiction glorifying rap because it's as much of a truth as recovery rap or spiritual rap is. And to turn my back on that part of me would be turning my back on the person that led me to who I am today. But in terms of how I found my inspiration to get back to it in recovery, I never stopped writing, but my ultimate form of expression in early recovery, when I took a break from putting music at the forefront, was putting my life back together. And one of the other addictions I had before I got sober was clout, as the millennials and Gen Zers call it, which is an addiction in itself. YouTube views, now today like TikTok views, Facebook views, it's a dopamine hit like anything else. And one of the things that helped me get back into music and recovery before I made it my avocation with the music and the writing here at Old Mill Road Recording and Old Mill Road Media is I heard a song by an artist named Kalichi, who is now in a beautiful full circle moment, the featured artist on one song in my brand new EP that dropped last Friday. But I heard a song he put out in 2017 when I was a year sober called Drug Addiction. And at the time, I was making music, like uploading it on SoundCloud, not doing anything too crazy. And I would show my recovery-themed music to the people I made music with in active addiction who never got as bad as me, like with fentanyl and crack, but they would like drink, smoke pot, like whatever, no judgment. But because they had never been through addiction, like, yeah, this is cool, man, but nobody's going to relate to this. But when I heard Drug Addiction by Kalichi, you mentioned Eminem. Eminem has great songs about recovery, but he intentionally keeps them kind of all-encompassing and vague because he wants them to relate to as many people as possible, and that's a beautiful thing. But I had never heard someone get into the raw nitty-gritty of what it's like to be an IV heroin and crack cocaine addict like Kalichi did. And he's one of the people who really ignited the recovery rap movement. And he makes songs about things besides recovery too, mental health, fatherhood, a lot of things. But he burst onto the scene with drug addiction. So at the time when I was rediscovering my creative personality and what I wanted to do with my recovery music, he was one of my primary inspirations. And then a year after that song, I serendipitously came into contact with this producer who owned the studio that I'm now the resident composer and artist at. And he was also someone who had a lot of experience working as a hospitalist and physician on community initiatives to combat the opioid epidemic. So what we ended up working out, and this arrangement continues to evolve to this day, is that I did a year-long arts residency with a nonprofit called 1761 Arts through the studio. And we worked both as a producer and a musician and a doctor and a recovering addict on my debut album, Clean, which combined my passions for classical piano, poetry, spoken word, and hip-hop into an album that told the story of my recovery. And that would have never happened if I wasn't inspired by what Kalichi did, and it never would have happened if in the same way I didn't ask people for help and make positive connections in recovery, I didn't do the same thing and reach out to people who have the resources I needed to help me on my musical journey. So I'm sorry if I went too far on that, man, but there's a lot of moving pieces here. I'm just trying to make it as transparent as possible.
No, man, that's so cool. So last week we had a guest that has a foundation in Florida, and they gave away 26,000 Narcans last year in the county that they live in. And they were talking about the fentanyl. They lost the gentleman that we had on lost his wife and his daughter to fentanyl overdoses. And you mentioned fentanyl, and one of the things that he mentioned that surprised me was that they're lacing marijuana nowadays with fentanyl, and they're putting fentanyl in all kinds of different things. Why the hell would somebody do that?
Well, I want to make something very clear that I'm not an addiction science specialist, although
Right.
I have worked in the treatment industry. What I have is 10 years of lived experience in active addiction, 8.5 years one day at a time in grateful recovery, and firsthand knowledge having lost more friends and acquaintances and people I used with and went to rehab with than I can count on my fingers and toes. And I will give a reason that I know to be fact for why fentanyl is present in everything now. So follow the rolling ball with me. There's a lot of shows like Dope Sick and, that different shows on HBO and Netflix that talk about the OxyContin epidemic and how Purdue Pharma marketed a drug that they said was not addictive and got FDA approval. That's a whole other thing. But towards the end, when they started getting lawsuits, the formula of OxyContin got changed to something that could be abused, to something that in its chemical formulation could not be snorted, injected, or smoked. And so if you see when those lawsuits first hit in 2011, 2012, 2013, when they changed the formula of the pills to make them non-abusable, you see a downtick in OxyContin overdoses, aka oxycodone, and an uptick in diamorphine, aka heroin overdoses. But the thing about heroin is, and this has always been the case, that just like any other product, it's distributed through hubs, like cities. So when it gets out to the country, the potency goes down. And the thing about OxyContin was because it was a regulated product, people got used to, even though it was lower potency overall than heroin, getting the same product every time. And so by the time it proliferated out into the suburbs and the exurbs in the country, the heroin was very inconsistent. And so dealers started realizing that if they wanted to have strong product that kept people coming back, they could source a chemical called fentanyl that is used in anesthesia, in very severe pain treatment, that was not made by the pharmaceutical companies, but made by illicit chemical manufacturers overseas and sent en masse. And so what ended up happening is all the heroin got cut with fentanyl because people started realizing that if they cut the heroin with fentanyl, it would keep people coming back. Because the sad thing is, and I can speak on this from experience, when I heard that one of my friends had overdosed either fatally or non-fatally, that didn't dissuade me from copping it. That made me want to cop it more because I was like, I'll just use less, but I'll get more bang for my buck. But what ended up happening is they realized that they were paying too much to have any heroin in it, period. So eventually the heroin wasn't even heroin anymore. People thought they were getting heroin, but what they were getting was fentanyl and lactose powder. And then something even crazier happened, which is the dealers who were selling heroin realized that fentanyl was actually cheaper than some of the cuts, like inositol for cocaine, and then different, illicit cuts that they were putting in MDMA and ketamine and things like that. So people started cutting their drugs with fentanyl, not because people wanted it, but because it was actually cheaper to cut their drugs with fentanyl than other innocuous cuts. So what ended up happening is fentanyl got so cheap, so widely available because of a series of international factors with the precursor manufacturers in China and India, the Mexican cartels who put it in there, that it wasn't even an intention to put it there to hook people. It's just that it's so ubiquitous and has proliferated so strongly that people just toss it in now as like a de facto thing. And it's changing. No drug supply is perfectly, cut or not cut with anything. But the sad fact is that when people say the phrase fentanyl poisoning, the truth is that whether you're referring to the heroin users back in the mid-2010s who didn't know they were getting fentanyl, but then their tolerance skyrocketed and they were poisoned but survived because they had a high enough tolerance, or dads, daughters, sons, moms who get poisoned by cocaine or MDMA or marijuana laced with fentanyl, it's poisoning because they don't know they're getting it, but the unregulated drug market has progressed to the point that it is literally cheaper to spike something with fentanyl than it is to cut it with anything else.
That's terrible.
Wow. It's really scary.
I appreciate your insight on that. I really do. So I wanted to focus more on you for the rest of the podcast if we can.
Of course.
How do you get your motivation to become creative?
I think that it's less about motivation and more about finding a way to channel it. I think that if anybody's an addict or has any compulsive behavior, be it substance-oriented or not, there's a constant drive to look outside oneself for validation and comfort. And when I got sober, that drive had to go over to internal discovery. And it had to go to finding a source of fulfillment that sometimes translates through real natural endorphins, that although it's not the same thing as like shooting fentanyl or smoking crack, like my brain gives me the chemicals that I need, and that can get activated through the creative process. But when I started getting active on social media, really getting prolific with the recovery content and music reels, it was at a time after my first son had been born and I had already put my album out. I already done like a lot of recovery advocacy engagements. And I saw my girlfriend pull up reels that had nothing to do with recovery or recovery music on her phone. And she's like, you should make these. You got a column about recovery. You got a radio show. You're going to speak. You should have fun doing this. And I'm like, nah, because at the time my girlfriend was 22 years old and I was, about to be 31, and the broad continuum, that's not that old, but Gen Z is the biggest audience for reels. And I thought I was Old Man River. I'm like, no one's going to want to listen. But then the algorithm did its magic and it showed me a reel from someone who was in recovery. And I was like, this isn't just going to be something I want to be part of as part of a community. This is actually going to be something that I find healing and purpose in. And I had no idea how I was going to do it in the beginning, both at the studio making the music for like the 60-second clips that I started the platform with music-wise, and for the talk content, which I still do to this day, because I was doing my job as a journalist and a writer during the daytime. I was changing diapers. I was trying to be there and present for my son and my recovery. But I realized that the 5 minutes that I got walking my dog around the block, when I didn't think I had anything to say, but I had all these thoughts going on in my head, was a perfect time, not just for the sake of creating for a platform, but to vent the things that I didn't get to say to an in-person recovery group because I was taking time away to be with my son. So the phone became my confessional. The phone became the place where I started speaking on the things that I was still processing from my recovery, and the booth at the studio became the same thing. So it wasn't how did I find the motivation, it was how did I find the outlet? Because I had all this pent-up creative energy from being a dad who was staying at home with his son and rediscovering that element of my life and trying to balance all these things, and the anxiety and the angst that came with that had no outlet. So when I picked up my phone and I got back to the studio making music more prolifically, it was actually a very healing experience because I was able to sublimate that anxiety into a daily ritual, much like what I do for my recovery, that doesn't just serve as a source of content, it serves as a source of comfort and a source of an outlet for my creative purpose.
So as being a father, has that been difficult for you as a recovering addict?
Well, I'll tell you this much. The one thing that I will say is that as someone who used to throw up and have digestive accidents, let's just say, in the middle of the night, being dope sick or hungover, I have a little bit more tolerance to waking up 2-3 times a night to change diapers and be cried at, except now I'm not the one throwing up and crying, it's my babies. So, I think the resilience and kind of adapts because if you're used to being at all hours of the day and having your life be chaotic, then that aspect of parenthood, if you are a person in recovery who has experienced low bottom addiction, can actually be easier in some ways, because as an addict, I thrive in chaos. It has been tough, but at the same time, it really takes me back to early sobriety, because it's tough, but the overarching thing, more than how tough it is to balance, is the complete joy and the incredible, I don't want to trivialize it by saying novelty, but seeing life through a new set of eyes and really rediscovering oneself in a new phase of one's life that comes with parenthood, regardless of what your kid's like, how old you are, what your parenting style is. When Jude was born, and he was born 6 days before my sobriety anniversary date, my sobriety date is June 13th, and he was born on June 7th. It was a rebirth, just like getting sober was. It was a chance for me to rediscover all the things that I had to work on, and it still is. Jude's 2.5 now. My younger son, Max, just turned 1 in December. And every single day, just like recovery, it's a chance for me to get in contact with a younger version of myself that still needs healing, and try to work on myself in a way that isn't always perfect, but brings so much joy when I can, just like in recovery, take out the blocks I put in place of my own healing and my own growth. And I can see myself reflected in their eyes and the way they're playing. And I can think about all the times in my life that I had similar experiences and just dive into that. So I think that being a parent is just like working a program of recovery or mental health. It's whatever I want it to be that day. It's a gift, just like being sober is. But it's also a constant practice and daily reprieve that's contingent upon my willingness to embrace it. Because just like recovery, if I don't embrace the gifts, then yeah, it can seem like a burden, even though I love my kids so much, like juggling work and parenthood. But if I see it not only as a chance to connect with my kids, but connect with myself and grow through the experience, then it becomes a double gift. And that's what I try to see it as, even on the days when I got 2 hours of sleep and I got work assignments, got to upload content, changing diapers and stuff, when I can change my perspective and really just be there. It's not just the gift of having children. It's the gift of rediscovering my inner child through them and healing the things from the past that before I became a parent, I wasn't even able to see.
Isn't it crazy the amount of love that you have for somebody that, like when your girlfriend was pregnant, you're like, you know what, I love her. And then when that baby's born, you're like, oh my God, I've never even met this person before, and I love this person more than I love anything. And then you have another child and you're like, there's no way I could possibly love oh my God. And then you love your second child as much as you love your first child. And then I have 4 kids. So, I mean, every time I'm like, there's no possible. And then now I'm a grandparent now too. And so going from parenthood to grandparenthood, it's the same thing. You're like, there's no possible way I can love you know what I mean? It's just the whole thing is just kind of crazy. The amount of love that's out there for your kids and grandkids and family, and it's pretty awesome. So congratulations to you for that,
Congratulations to you too. And I completely agree. Like every single moment that I spend with them, I get to meet them every day. And, I try to bring that same level of engagement and just awe every day. It doesn't always happen, but I try to think that every single day is the first time I'm bringing them home, because the truth is that, my first real tangible memories were when I was 3.5 and 4. So if they're anything like me, it is going to be like meeting me for the first time consciously every day. So if I bring it that energy every day, and it's like, hi, how are you? Like, let's rediscover each other. Then that to me is the essence of it, because you're right. You bring them home and you can't possibly love them as much as you're going to.
Right.
But for me, it's like every day. It's like, wow, like where'd that come from? And it's just amazing.
That's cool. And you can see the light in your eyes, too, when you talk about your kids. So, Ben, how do you handle setbacks or temptations? I mean, is that something that you still are dealing with 8.5 years into recovery?
Not as frequently in terms of visceral cravings, but I mean, I think addiction, I was addicted to things besides substances like approval and like, external material things before the liquor and the dope came into play. So on the other side, kind of regressing and working through it on the other end, like, even though the substances aren't really what I'm physically craving anymore, I still have cravings from time to time. Like, I had a really bad one 2 months ago that came up because of immense physical and emotional and mental pain and exhaustion. And I called people and I worked through it. But those are few and far between. I think that the way that my addiction and my temptation manifests is that even with no chemicals in the picture, I can be a resentful, angry, just chaotic mess. and I can project my insecurities and doubts and fears onto other people and make my life equally as unmanageable, except maybe it's not draining my bank account or putting me at risk of overdoses when I was in active addiction. But make no mistake, I'm 8.5 years sober, but that doesn't mean I'm emotionally sober unless I do the work. That doesn't mean that, like, you know, my brain is going to be balanced, my spirit is going to be balanced, unless I make a conscious effort to remind myself that those same patterns, even though the needle's out of my vein and the pipe and bottle's out of my mouth, can manifest in other destructive ways. So yes, Tim, I guess I'll talk about early on in recovery. What I had to do is realize that the same insecurities, anxiety, doubt, and fear that I thought was trapping me in the cycle of, you know, turning to a chemical forever could actually be the motivation that pushed me towards recovery. It's like what I talked about with what motivated me to make music and make content in the prolific way I have. It's like I needed a channel for it. And there's that old phrase, separate from recovery and addiction, idle hands are the devil's workshop. So, you know, in early recovery, I had all this restless anxiety and energy that I wanted to medicate with like dope and benzos. And, you know, I would be bored and I would want to use uppers like Coke or Adderall or crack or whatever. And when I realized that that boredom was, instead of fuel to like go cop uppers, was like fuel to go see something that I could discover that brought me fulfillment. And when I was anxious and when I was like jumping out of my skin, I was like, I need to work like a labor job in the service industry. And then the job found me. And then that was at the right time, physically in engagement, to get me out of myself. So early on, what helped me a lot was finding outlets for my physical anxiety. And today, now that the chemical craving is not as much as it used to be the problem, it's finding an outlet for my emotional and mental anxiety and a curative way that I can transform the very thing that's holding me back and tempting a relapse into energy that propels me forward. And I don't always do it perfectly, but when I can remain conscious of that and use it in my work, it gets a lot easier. And it actually becomes an asset rather than a liability.
So how do you give advice to somebody that's struggling in their own, you know, source of motivation? Because everybody's got their, you know, they get out of bed, they're like, hey, I don't want to do anything today, or I don't want to, or in your case, you know, I don't have to go to work, I don't have to walk the dog, I don't have to take care of the kids, I don't want to create some new music, I don't want to do something. How do you motivate somebody or give somebody the ideas of what they need to do in order to stay motivated, in order to get the stuff done that they need to do?
I think the first thing is realizing that you're not a bad person if you don't feel motivated. It's the same thing I was just talking about with the cravings. It's like, I didn't just feel that it was a self-perpetuating, inescapable cycle because I felt trapped in my head and my body with the unease that came from a chemical craving, and more than that, a desire to escape my reality. I thought I was a weak and bad person, which added like a guilt element to that. So I feel like for me, when I have procrastinatory surges where it kind of like overtakes me and I feel glued to my seat, the first thing that I have to remember is a very wise person told me in early recovery, and then another wise person repeated it to me when I was about to be a dad, you know, almost 6 years in. He said, action doesn't always follow motivation. Sometimes motivation follows action. Sometimes you can be searching, I'll use the I can be searching for motivation to get out of bed, waiting for kind of a surge in natural endorphin or divine energy to get me out there, like get me to do what I need to do for my work. But sometimes taking the first step, instead of waiting for the energy to do it, gives me the energy to take the next steps. Like this morning, I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't go to bed till like 2 or 3 because I had to do my radio show. I had to do some clips for like some music we're releasing. I had to like come up with a series of 30 questions for an article interview I'm doing after we finish this podcast. And I woke up at 8 to my son being like, Dad, come hang out. And I was like, nah. Like, God bless my girlfriend. She lets me sleep in a lot of the time. But what I'm finding is that when I don't get out of bed, as tired as I am, I'm packing some fresh bags. Now I ain't talking carry-ons. You feel me? When I'm able to like get up and like take that first step, I'm actually less tired emotionally than I would be if I slept in. And I'm not saying don't sleep in for self-care. Everybody's different. What I'm saying is on the days when I realize that my motivation is a verb and not a noun. It's a practice and not an object. Then I can come up with the solution that I got to generate my own motivation. So if I can do anything, it's to motivate you to make yourself motivated. It's not going to come out of thin air. Sometimes it does, and that's a gift. But if a $100 bill floated out of a truck on a highway and like coasted onto like a table at a rest stop, you wouldn't quit your job. No. If anything, it'd be like, wow, the universe is blessing me with this 100. Maybe that's a sign I need to chase my own. And so natural motivation is beautiful when I ain't got to work for it, But when I see it's up to me to find that motivation by taking the first step, even when I don't want to, that's when it really comes in cascades.
So I want to kind of share a story that happened to me this last weekend. So I don't know if you remember or not. I work as a bartender. So I'm a food server and a drink server. And a guy came in, ordered a prime rib dinner for him and his daughter to go. And he's sitting down, he's talking to these people that are next to him, and he pulls me off to the side. He's like, I want to buy these people their dinner. And then I want to buy that other people their dinner. And he paid for their dinner, and then he gave me a $200 tip, right? So I took that $200. He goes, do what you want with the $200. So there's 4 of us working. I gave us each $50. And he goes, so what'd you decide to do? I said, I gave everybody $50. He goes, that's why you're a good dude, man. And I'm not saying that to do that, but so here's the thing. So I did that, and then he threw another $100 on the table when he left because of that. Well, then fast forward to last night. One of the ladies that I gave that to won some money and basically gave me something back because of that. So, I mean, it's kind of like this whole back and forth thing where you said about chasing the $100 bill, not really doing the chasing, but it's kind of cool how stuff just kind of works out, you know?
It absolutely is. And I love that story from the service industry. There are so many stories from when I was working as a bartender and a server, which I think actually is the foundation of my recovery just as much as the groups and like the treatment centers that I've been a part of. It taught me so many lessons about the importance of service to others, about the importance of delayed gratification, about the importance of finding motivation and finding discipline and finding balance in the chaos. So that just warms my heart to hear, man. Thank you so much for that.
Well, no, thank you for the stuff that you're doing. I want to bring us back to what we're talking about earlier when you mentioned the whole clout thing, and you said, the Generation Z are the people that are watching you. I'm the one that found you actually for our podcast, and I'm the oldest person in our podcast group. So I'm 56 years old. I'm a Santa looking dude, and I found you, and I thought your stuff was great and motivating to me as an ally, and I thought this is great. So that's how we ended up having you. And I do some Facebook creating and stuff too for Reels, and I'm kind of addicted to that whole clout thing as well. Because I mean, it's like, okay, how many views did I get? I got 57 comments on this thing, and it's funny how you're in your 30s. There's people in their 20s. There's people in their teens that are all doing the same thing, and I think we're all kind of addicted to that whole, oh yeah, we got some extra people. We got some extra people checking the stuff out,
Yeah, I mean, my whole thing about it is, again, just like the motivation thing, I have no reservations in admitting that I like when people like my stuff. I mean, there's a great quote from a great rapper, J. Cole, in the outro to one of his best songs, which is Fire Squad, and he says, at the end of the day, all poets just want to be loved. And he's talking about people were trying to put him on the throne in the rap game with, at the time, him, Kendrick, and Drake as the top 3. And he said, there's not going to be any more kings. It's just people going out there and doing what they love. I'm not going to chase after that anymore. I love it when one of my reels takes off. I love it when one of my songs gets a lot of streams. I think that, like anything, if I'm not going to be okay, funnily enough, the content that I make and its quality based on my spiritual balance is going to be dictated by how my other content does, then it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle where that understandable fall off, just like any drug, manufactured in our head by looking at a phone or manufactured by like a cartel coming in our nose or our vein, it becomes a self-perpetuating, debilitating cycle at the point where I start devaluing my content based on the amount of interactions. And I find myself doing that sometimes. And I need to tell myself, it's okay that the human attention validation seeking part of you is doing that. You're not a bad person for that. But in the same way I had to realize that about the needle in my arm, you're not a bad person who deserves to be sober as punishment. You're a good person who deserves to be sober because you deserve to stay alive. With the clout chasing, I have to realize you're not a bad person because you want to be seen. You're a creator. That makes sense, regardless of the medium. You're a good person who deserves to be happy with the content you're making, regardless of how many people see it, because the algorithm's going to do what it does. And I don't run Facebook. I don't run TikTok. I don't run YouTube. I'm just a creator in recovery. And if I look at the algorithm and all that stuff the same way as I look at the universe, and I can't run the universe the same way I can't run the algorithm, I can just do me, put what I got out there, and hope that it comes back in some good way or it gets paid forward. When I'm at my sanest and I'm at my best and I'm making my best content because of that, is when I can just detach and be like, a reel that gets 2 million views and helps 2 people is not as powerful as a reel that gets 500 views and helps 5 people. And I ain't never going to know that. There's no "this helped 5 people" icon at the bottom with the likes and shares. So I just got to keep that faith, hit that record button and speak out. And if the views and shares and likes and monetization comes, that's lovely. If not, I'm getting something bigger than any of that just by speaking my truth and gaining strength through that.
So a couple of things that you just mentioned right there. I have a tattoo right here. Be seen, be heard, be you. So basically the stuff that you're talking about right there. So I want to ask you a final question here. What does life look like for you now, and how do you keep yourself motivated to continue along the path that Ben Lerner is doing?
Some of my favorite content, this is more like the stuff that my girlfriend watches, is like a day in the life. Like it'll be a day in the life of a working mom or a stay-at-home mom of 6 kids. And it's like got like little tickers at the top. It's like 8:04, I got up and I did this. 8:20, I made breakfast. Like 9 o'clock, we went to the park. 9:30, dropped him off at daycare so I could go to work. And it's a great format. But see, the thing is, my life is so crazy, I literally can't do that. Because mine would look like 8 o'clock, get up with the kids. Like 8:15, take my dog for a walk. 8:30, check my email, upload the first reel. 8:40, check my email again to see what's going on with the music and the radio show and the meeting for this journalism thing and like the meeting for the story stuff. And then wait for 10 o'clock for my girlfriend to get back and she's got to go on a run. So I watch the kids while they're sleeping. And while I'm doing that, I'm uploading another reel and I'm like cutting captions for another thing. And then, the dog's got to get fed. So I'm holding the sleeping baby, hoping he doesn't wake up while I respond to a comment and like I put the food in the bowl. And it's nuts. And I would have to say, to be 100% honest, that although I wish I could be an arbiter of like perfect serenity and balance and actualization and recovery, I've learned to let the unsustainability sustain me. It's like a roller coaster, man. I mean, regardless of how involved you are in online content or work, or whether you volunteer, or whether you're just being there for your family, regardless of what stage it is in your life, it's okay to have a little craziness. And I just am grateful for the fact that the things I get to do in my life fill my cup as well as draining it. Because it's a balance, and when I'm ready to take in what's there, even in the chaos, I can be refreshed by the most insane and unbalanced things going in my day. But if I'm salty, if I'm all shriveled and I'm like, I hate the fact that I can't do exactly what I want right now, which does happen, I can let it get to me and drain me completely. So I'm riding the wave of chaos. I'm surfing it. And it's a beautiful shore I'm looking at, man, but I ain't ready to crash just yet, and I'm just moving forward one day, one post, and one baby laugh and diaper at a time.
Anything I'm missing, Ben?
I would say to anybody who's going through a personal crisis, be addiction or otherwise, I don't care if it's your 100th time trying. They say third time's the charm, sometimes the 101st time's the charm. Give yourself the gift and the grace to try again, because you're not a failure. You're just a good person who deserves to try again.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Fall, Rise, Give, where we explore stories of resilience, growth, and giving back. If you enjoyed today's episode, please visit our website at www.fallrisegive.com. Also, consider subscribing to our podcast on your favorite platform and leaving us a review. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you inspiring stories. Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, every fall is a chance to rise, and every rise is an opportunity to give. Until next time, keep falling, rising, and giving. This is Fall, Rise, Give, produced by podcastforhire.com. Thank you for listening.